In the hands of the Creator, what is broken becomes more precious than it ever was whole. It was one of those evenings when the sky seemed to hold on to the last light of day, casting a golden glow across the landscape. The disciples were gathered around a small fire, its flames crackling gently, creating a soft hum that mingled with the whispers of the wind. The day had been long and exhausting, but it had also been filled with miracles, teachings, and moments that stirred their hearts. As the sun dipped lower, the cool night air began to settle in, and the disciples drew closer to the warmth of the fire. They knew that these were the moments when Jesus often shared his most profound teachings. In these quiet hours he spoke in parables and stories, weaving together lessons of life, faith, and the mysteries of God's love in ways that left them in awe. Jesus sat among them, his gaze soft yet penetrating, as if he could see not only their faces but the burdens each one carried in their hearts. He knew them well, better than they knew themselves. He knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their moments of courage, and their moments of doubt. He also knew the deep sense of inadequacy that some of them carried, the feeling that they were not enough, that they had failed in ways that could not be mended. Sensing their unspoken need, Jesus cleared his throat softly, and immediately, the disciples' attention shifted fully to him. They knew that whenever Jesus began to speak in these moments, his words were not just stories. They were lifelines filled with deep wisdom and the promise of hope. There was once a great and powerful king. Jesus began, his voice calm and steady, drawing the disciples into the story with every word. This king was known throughout the land for his wealth, his wisdom, and his many treasures. His palace was filled with gold, jewels, and artifacts from distant lands. But among all his possessions, there was one item that he cherished above all: a beautiful vase. The disciples listened intently, their imaginations painting the picture of the king's grand palace, filled with treasures beyond imagination. This vase, Jesus continued, was no ordinary vase. It had been crafted by the finest artisan in the kingdom, made from the most delicate and pure porcelain. Its beauty was unmatched, its surface flawless, and its design so intricate that it seemed almost magical. The king loved this vase more than anything else he owned. He would often display it for his guests, taking great pride in its perfection. To him it was the symbol of his own greatness, flawless, unbroken, and whole. As Jesus spoke, the disciples could feel the tension in the air. They knew that perfection, like the vase, was fragile, and they waited for the moment when the story would take its inevitable turn. One day, Jesus said, his voice lowering slightly, a servant in the king's palace was tasked with cleaning the grand hall. As he worked, his foot caught on the edge of a rug, and before he could catch himself, he stumbled. In his fall, he knocked over the table where the vase stood. The vase teetered on the edge for a moment, and then, with a heart-wrenching crash, it fell to the floor and shattered into countless pieces. The disciples gasped, feeling the weight of the servant's mistake as if they had been there in that very hall. The sound of the vase shattering echoed through the palace, and the servant froze in horror. He knew how much the king loved that vase. It was irreplaceable, and now it lay in pieces on the floor. Fear gripped the servant's heart, for he was certain that his life was over. The king would surely punish him for destroying his most prized possession. Jesus paused, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. The disciples too felt the weight of the servant's fear. They had each experienced moments in their own lives where they felt as though they had shattered something precious, something that could never be restored. The king rushed into the hall. Jesus continued, his face pale with shock as he saw the broken vase scattered across the floor. His heart was filled with sorrow and anger. How could something so perfect, so valuable, be destroyed in an instant? He knelt down and touched the broken pieces with trembling hands, his mind racing. This vase had been a symbol of his perfection, his wealth, his pride. And now it was gone. The disciples could feel the tension in the air, the sorrow of the king mirrored in their own hearts. They, too, had experienced moments of loss, moments when something they cherished had been shattered beyond repair. In his grief, the king called upon the finest artisans in the land. Jesus said, his voice softening. "Restore this vase," he commanded. "Make it whole again. Make it perfect as it once was." The artisans, the most skilled in all the kingdom, worked day and night, carefully piecing the vase back together. But no matter how hard they tried, the cracks were still visible. The vase could be reassembled, but it could never be perfect again. The disciples could feel the frustration of the king, the desire for perfection that seemed forever out of reach. Seeing that the vase could never be restored to its original state, the king grew angry. Jesus continued, "If it cannot be perfect, then it is worthless," he declared. "Throw it away." The servants began to gather the broken vase to dispose of it, but before they could, an old artisan stepped forward. This artisan had lived many years and had seen many things. He bowed before the king and said, "Your Majesty, I cannot restore this vase to its former perfection. But if you will allow me, I can make it even more beautiful than it ever was before." The disciples leaned in closer, sensing that this was the turning point in the story. They could feel the hope rising in their hearts, the possibility of redemption, of something greater than mere perfection. The king, desperate to see his beloved vase restored in some way, agreed. He handed the broken pieces to the old artisan, who took them back to his workshop. But instead of trying to hide the cracks, the artisan did something unexpected. He filled each crack, each break, with molten gold. The gold traced every line, every flaw, and when the vase was finally reassembled, it was no longer flawless. But it was magnificent. Jesus paused, letting his words settle into the hearts of his disciples. The vase, once perfect and smooth, now shone with golden seams, each crack highlighted, not hidden. The imperfections that had once been a source of sorrow had been transformed into something far more beautiful. The vase, now filled with gold, was more valuable than it had ever been in its original state. What was once broken had become a masterpiece. Jesus stopped speaking, and for a moment, there was only the sound of the crackling fire and the gentle rustle of the wind. The disciples sat in silence, deeply moved by the story. They understood now that this was not just a tale about a vase. It was about them. It was about all of humanity. Peter, who had been unusually quiet, spoke first, his voice trembling with emotion. "Master, are we not like that broken vase?" Jesus turned to Peter, his eyes filled with love. "Yes, Peter. Each of us is like that vase. In life, we all experience moments of brokenness. We fail, we fall, and we feel as though we are no longer worthy. We carry our cracks and scars, believing they make us less valuable, less deserving of love." Peter's eyes filled with tears, for he had felt this brokenness deeply. He had made mistakes, doubted himself, and even doubted Jesus. But now, as he looked at his master, he began to see his flaws in a new light. "But," Jesus continued, "just as the artisan did not discard the broken vase, God does not discard us. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and mends them, not by hiding our flaws, but by filling them with His love, His grace. It is through our cracks, through our scars, that His light shines the brightest. And in the end, we are more beautiful, more valuable, because of the very things we thought made us unworthy." Tears now flowed freely down Peter's face, and he wasn't alone. Many of the disciples had their heads bowed, their hearts full of emotion. They had all felt the weight of their imperfections, the fear that they were too broken to be used by God. But now they saw that their brokenness was not a barrier to God's love. It was the very thing that allowed His love to shine through. John, ever the gentle and introspective one, spoke up next. "Master, is this why you came? To show us that our brokenness can be healed, that we are not worthless in the eyes of God?" Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with compassion. "Yes, John. I came to mend what is broken, to heal what is wounded, and to show you that your worth is not found in perfection. It is found in love. God does not demand that you be flawless. He only asks that you trust Him to fill your cracks with His grace. And when you do, you will shine with a beauty far greater than anything this world has to offer." The disciples sat in awe, their hearts full of peace. They had carried their brokenness like a burden, but now they saw it as a gift that allowed God's love to be revealed in their lives. Jesus stood, his face glowing with the light of the fire and the love he had for each of them. Remember, my beloved ones, in the hands of the Creator, what is broken is not discarded. It is mended, transformed, and made more precious than it ever was before. You are not defined by your cracks, you are defined by the love that fills them. And with those words, the disciples felt a deep sense of hope and joy fill their hearts. They were no longer afraid of their imperfections. They were no longer ashamed of their scars. They knew now that in the hands of God, they were being made into something more beautiful than they had ever imagined. As the night grew darker, the fire burned softly, casting a warm glow on the faces of the disciples. They sat together in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because their hearts were full of a new understanding, a new peace. They were not broken beyond repair. They were being mended piece by piece with the golden threads of God's love. And as they looked at Jesus, their hearts swelling with gratitude, they knew that they were more precious than any vase, more loved than they could ever comprehend. They were masterpieces in the making, held together by the hands of the master artisan, shining with the light of grace, cracks and all. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.